Our first speaker is Guy Bisson, who's the co-director and founder of Ampere Analysis. Guy,
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, mate.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Justin. And what Justin doesn't know is that thanks to American Airlines, I almost didn't make it here. 2 cancelled flights arrived only yesterday. So forgive me if I'm a little wonky on stage. But yes, as Justin said, what I've been asked to run through today is what's going on with the broadcast market, the traditional market, and the streaming market, and how can traditional players defend themselves against the onslaught of global streaming. So, cracking the code, streaming success for broadcasters. Firstly, this is from our consumer data, and what it shows, this is not streaming versus traditional television. It is ownership of viewers. So streaming ownership of viewers and traditional broadcaster ownership of viewers. The blue line including their streaming services. And what it shows is that streaming, global streaming plus the local subscription streaming is now equaling broadcast plus broadcast streaming in terms of viewing time each day. So a very important inflection point. And note also how those two are leveling out together. The money, though, has not quite caught up. So we're a few years away before the money that flows from streaming, including the subscription business, exceeds the money from the traditional business, including their streaming business. So we've got an inflection point where the money will catch up with the viewing 2 to 3 years later after that viewing inflection point. One of the issues facing the traditional broadcasters in particular is the younger demographic. So that younger demographic is disappearing. Graph on the left is the broadcast channels, and you can see they skew away from the 18 to 34s. Graph on the right is the broadcast channels streaming services, which also skew away from that same audience. So the streaming assets are not recapturing that migrating audience. And it is possible to do. This is BBC iPlayer and BBC Channels. Channels, just like here, skew away from that younger demographic. BBC iPlayer is 0. Those pink bars are near to 0 because the demographic is equal to the split within the country as a whole, i.e. they are demographically balanced, or iPlayer is demographically balanced. So we've got a number of challenges that broadcasters are facing. Younger demographic is disappearing. Intense competition for those viewers from streaming. Competition now has been strong for many years, but it's growing exponentially thanks to a couple of factors. The entrance of AVOD platforms, pure play ad-supported streamers, the hybridization of subscription streaming, so the bringing on of advertising, and the emerging market for fast, linear streamed television channels. That means, of course, that revenue is under threat, both public revenue and, more importantly, advertising revenue. And streamers are beginning to dominate now in the content market. So when I used to analyze rankings of the most popular TV dramas and TV shows in local markets, the broadcasters, the local broadcasters, always had a great showing in that top 10. Increasingly, they are disappearing from that top 10 as the streamers dominate in show popularity. So at the moment, our forecasts suggest that a third of TV advertising, so that's TV embracing streaming as well, will go to streamers, VOD and fast channels also, within 5 to 6 years' time. What I would suggest is that that is an underestimate because it doesn't take into account future launches that have yet to happen within that market. So a significant market share beginning to migrate to streaming platforms. Still growth left for traditional players, but of course we've got this shifting balance of power. And what that means, of course, or as a result of, we're seeing specific demographic clusters form around the different types of streaming platform. So everyone on here is a streaming service. I've removed the broadcast bit. You've got the streaming services of the broadcasters, the global players, and the local streaming platforms as well. And what you can see is that the global streamers have a particularly attractive, young, gender-balanced demographic profile, slightly skewing female for Disney and Paramount, whereas the broadcasters are skewing much older. And on the right, we've got the income against the age. And again, you can see that the streamers, the global streamers, are skewing young and wealthy compared to the locals who are old and more or less in the middle, with a couple of exceptions. So demographic cohorts emerging that are very, very attractive in favor of some of those global streaming platforms. But actually, streamers themselves, their glory days that are not over, but they've hit a bit of a wall. So globally, streaming saturation is taking effect. Our data suggests that the stacking rate for streaming services, the number that people take, has flattened at around 3 to 3.5 globally for the last 2 years. So people are not stacking more and more services. There's been a knock-on effect on content spend. The only streamer, global streamer, still increasing its commissioning rate is Amazon. But the secondary effect of that, the reinvestigation of content strategy, means streamers are coming increasingly into the broadcast space with unscripted content in particular. So, now for the biology lesson. Charles Darwin said, if you take two different organisms and you subject them to the same pressures, they will develop similar adaptations. That is convergent evolution. And what we're seeing between broadcast and streaming at the moment is convergence of audience, convergence of content strategy, a re-emergence of licensing, and a convergence, therefore, of business models and strategies. So what do you do? Well, one thing you can do is draw on something that Darwin did not say, and that is imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So what I'm suggesting is, what we should do is ask ourselves, what do the streamers do really well that brings them that demographic and that attractive audience? And then shamelessly, you should copy them. So the broadcasters need to examine the strategies of the global streamers to replicate in their own streaming services. So first thing that global streamers do well is offer lots of content. They have very big catalogues relative to the local broadcast catalogues. Now, interestingly, the local streaming players have a very similar sized catalogue. The second thing they do well, or has served them very well at least to date, this is changing, is focus on scripted content, not unscripted. So the audience think of the streamers as the place that you go for increasingly high quality drama. And the third thing that they do very well is they keep the content fresh. The perception of freshness is very, very strong. That pink line completely even throughout the year. This is first-run premieres coming onto platform versus the broadcasters, which have a very cyclical nature to their premiere first-run content on those services. So a fast and steady flow-through of new original content is really important. But perception is 9/10 of reality. And what I mean by that is, if you can't replicate the strategy exactly, and of course, massive amounts of fresh first-run content, for example, cost quite a bit of money, then you can at least adopt strategies that give the perception of large catalogues, freshness, and a scripted forward footprint. So this brings us on to the mistakes that are being made against that potential strategy. Number one is not using the power of streaming premieres. So in Australia, 4% of content has its premiere, first-run content, has its premiere on the streaming platforms of the broadcasters. In Europe, that is as high as 22%, and in Europe, that number has dropped drastically over the last 5 years. So they used to premiere even more on the streaming platforms, but as those platforms have converged in audience, they've reduced that strategy. Here, though, the streaming platforms are not being prioritized by the broadcasters. Second mistake is not leveraging the unscripted streaming advantage. So we said global streamers are known for their scripted skew. Local broadcasters are very strong in unscripted, in entertainment, in reality. When they do premiere content, they premiere their scripted content. Kind of logical. Except the opportunity is to leverage that unscripted advantage, because hardly any of that premieres on streaming platforms. And guess what? That young demographic that is disappearing are particularly keen on the types of genres where unscripted content tends to fill the schedule. Unscripted also has other advantages, and it's an advantage that gives you a leap on the streamers. I don't know which streamers you have at home, but if you've been watching them in the last 12 months, you'll have seen the increasing prevalence of weekly drops of dramas rather than dropping entire seasons onto platforms. Unscripted content is particularly well suited to weekly and, in some cases, daily drops, which keeps the audience engaged with the platform long term. And now that we're in saturated streaming markets, that engagement, that length of engagement and customer relationship or viewer relationship is increasingly important. Mistake number three is maintaining budget allocation status quo. So the streamers skew quite heavily to a number of really key genres for that younger, wealthier, attractive demographic. In particular, comedy is very important. Children's content for young families. And romance is a really interesting one that seems to be growing really, really strongly around the world. And streamers are allocating a lot of their budget to this area versus the broadcasters. So Justin did ask me to come up with 3 mistakes that the broadcasters are making. So I thought I'd give him a bonus and do 4. And anyway, you can't do a presentation these days without mentioning FAST. So FAST, free ad-supported streaming television. Most importantly, it is linear TV in a streamed format. FAST presents a number of opportunities, and let me say right away, it is overhyped in many, many markets. FAST is pretty big in the US. Around 40% of households watch FAST channels and platforms in a given month. Everywhere else, whether it's here or Europe or wherever else you want to look, it's around the 6 to 8% mark. So relatively low penetration in terms of viewers engaging with the platforms. Nonetheless, it does present a number of really interesting opportunities. Firstly, because it's very cheap to get a FAST channel off the ground, about $4,000, about $1,500 monthly running costs thereafter, not including the cost of content. And what you can do with those FAST channels is plug some of those content holes that attract particular demographics, because there's a bipolar audience on FAST. It attracts an older and a younger demographic, and it kind of misses the middle sometimes. You can use the channels to enhance the interest in the main platform, the main streaming platform, by using prior seasons of shows when new seasons drop on the main outlet for the content. And you can begin to plug some of those holes in strategy. So mistake number 4 then is missing the twofold potential of FAST. And we're increasingly seeing broadcast streaming platforms make use of that opportunity here and in Europe. So final slide, and I only have 3 seconds left. And let me say that there's a QR code on the next slide. Get your phones out, you can download the presentation. What have we got going on? We've got audience fragmentation, a loss of the younger audience. So a digital-first strategy around the streaming asset is absolutely essential. Advertising revenue is under threat, and that is only going in one direction. So copying, aping what streamers do best, and pulling from some of those strategies with the streaming asset is particularly important. You've got young audience disappearing, and you need to get the old audience who are watching the broadcast channels to start using the streaming more. FAST is one way that you can do that. And as ad revenue increasingly becomes under threat from the global streamers, that market share erosion is a significant risk. So solve all of the other problems, and you will lessen that as an issue. With that, I'm at time. I'll say thank you very much. Do download the presentation. I'm around all day. Come and say hello. Thank you.
Stay there for 2 seconds. ITVX in the UK are making a big splash about their streaming service. They've been playing with a lot of the content strategies that you've been referring to. Is that a successful model, something that the broadcasters here could replicate?
Yeah, I think ITVX is a very successful model, and the complete revamp that they've had of the platform, bringing on some of those, or more of those fast channels is one of the strategies they've been using as well. Very successful.
Yeah, and also building a massive content library. They're stacking their streaming service with a shit ton of inventory to deal with that exact challenge. And I know it's very much a growing proposition for ITV. Final question, if you can put a number on it. Amazon Prime are launching in this market. I know they're clients of yours, so this is particularly sensitive. But how much of money do you think they'll take out of the TV market? Or how much money do you think they'll attract to their Amazon Prime ads service?
So what I'm going to do is not be diplomatic, not put a number on it, but what I would say is that Amazon have a couple of very significant advantages that are important in the streaming ad market. One is they attract a hard-to-reach demographic, so the slightly older male-skewed audience, which is attractive. And the second thing is that their targeting ability is probably second to none. I've experienced it in the US with the ad targeting that Amazon does. Their ability to link, and especially with the increasing prevalence of interactive advertising, buy-through, etc., Amazon are very, very well positioned.
So you're going for a lot, but you're not going to put a number on it?
I think they'll be a significant player in the market.
All right, that's as good as I'm going to get. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Guy a massive round of applause for that.
Thank you.